Hello and welcome back to another episode of id Software Shooters, and we're going to take a look at the big one, Doom. So Doom was released in 1993, and for its time it was actually it was just impressive. Like, nobody has ever seen anything like it. I mean, just think about this for a sec. Wolfenstein 3D just doesn't look nearly as good as this game, and this game came out only about a year after Wolfenstein 3D. And the best part is that you did not need an extremely powerful computer to run this game. You know, if you had a standard 486 computer, that would be sufficient. Now, granted, you could potentially get this to run on the 386, which was significantly slower, but you know, 486 was the preferred computer to run this on. Now, the thing that I really like about Doom is the very intricate level design and the variety of enemies and weapons that this game has to offer. Now, the guy that made the music for this game, you can kind of hear in the background sort of that MIDI music, rock music that the composer created. His name is Bobby Prince, by the way. Now, Bobby Prince was, you know, he worked on pretty much all id Software games at the time. Like, he worked on the Commander Keen episode 4, 5, and 6, and he worked on Cacodemon 3D's music. Well, that was also used in Commander Keen 4, and of course he did Wolfenstein 3D. And then obviously he would go on to do Doom 1 and Doom 2. Now, the thing about Bobby Prince is that you think it's this young guy, you know, like all of the guys at id Software were like in their 20s when they developed these games. Bobby Prince, I've seen pictures of him. He was already like maybe in his 50s or 40s or something like that when he worked at id Software. Yeah, I know that zombie exploded back there. I'm going to be shooting a lot of barrels during this run. Anyways, so Bobby Prince, I consider to be a very talented composer, not just because he knows how to come up with catchy tunes, but he really knows how to adapt. He knows how to make music that totally fits the tone of every game that he composes music for. So like Wolfenstein 3D sort of has that very marchy type of, you know, World War II type of music, and Commander Keen has that very light-hearted, silly kind of music, and Doom has sort of, you know, is very rock inspired. Now, of course, you know, they didn't use real instruments because, you know, computers back then had, you know, games had to be stored on floppies and CDs and stuff like that, and they didn't like, computers mostly did not always have CD-ROMs, so they made sure that these games could run on computers that only had floppy disk drives, and which means the music cannot be CD quality. So they're using sort of a synthesized music, and even though it's all synthesized, it totally sounds like it's, you know, trying to create that sort of you know, rock electric guitar sound to it. And of course, this game was compatible with many different sound devices, not just the Sound Blaster and the Ad-Lib like with Wolfenstein 3D, but also some additional stuff like the Gravis Ultrasound, which, by the way, had superior music capabilities. And I suppose it also had Roland support. I'm not too sure about that. I'm pretty sure it does. I mean, every game back in the early 90s had Roland support. At least PC games did. And yeah, that guy shot the barrel before I was able to shoot it. And this is something very common in Doom. You know, a lot of you know, surprises like that happens quite a few times, especially in Doom 2. But Doom 2 isn't significantly different from Doom 1, so we're gonna spend less time with Doom 2 than we would with Doom 1. They basically made Doom 2 from using the same assets as Doom 1, just with some added features. But we're not talking about Doom 2. So Doom 1 had, like I said, a variety of devices to run the audio, but, you know, like with Wolfenstein, you couldn't run this on EGA 16 color graphics. You had to have VGA graphics card that had 256 color capabilities. So even though this game can run on most modern PCs at the time, it did sort of set the standard where, you know, now we cannot go back. Now the only way to have better 3D games is to have better computers, and you know, and that would be very obvious with a game like Quake, where you have to have a Pentium to run that game. You cannot use a 486, but this game was the last game to run on a 486 fairly well. Now, this game was inspired by all of these games, you know, Wolfenstein 3D, Doom, Quake. All of these games inspired were inspired by many other sources. Like, for instance, Doom was heavily inspired by Dungeons and Dragons. In fact, many of the monsters were blatantly ripped from concept art and you know, paintings that were there to promote Dungeons and Dragons, like the Cacodemon, which is I don't know if we'll ever see one in this playthrough, but in a later playthrough you'll see one. It's sort of this big red round monster that flies and has this huge mouth that just shoots fireballs at you, that spits out fireballs. That was completely taken out of Dungeons and Dragons. They didn't even change the design of the creature. I'll put the link in the description below if I can find the picture of it, and also compare it to the Cacodemon in Doom. But yeah, so the guys at id Software, they really liked playing Dungeons and Dragons, and Dungeons and Dragons was very had a lot of creative ideas, a lot of creative monsters, so it's no wonder why they did that. So this level is actually a pretty short level if you know how to perform a certain shortcuts, but I'll mention it when we get there. I'm just missing a whole bunch of these guys. Now, one complaint I do have with Doom is that when you fire a monster, obviously you cannot look up and down, and I'll explain why I cannot look up and down later in this playthrough. But basically, so I cannot look up and down, which means when there's a monster that is slightly elevated above the player or slightly below the player's view, the engine would then adjust the height of your projectiles accordingly, so that you'll hit them without the need to look up and down. But the problem with that is that sometimes you want to shoot up, and sometimes the engine won't quite register that you want to shoot up, so you'll have a bit of problem, and I had a bit of problem just like you know, the 2 minutes ago, where I was just being shot so much. The controls are also kind of weird if you want to use a mouse, because this was back during the time when a mouse was used for rotating your character. In the past, you had to, like with Wolfenstein 3D, you had to use the arrow keys, you know, turn left and right with the arrow keys instead of with the mouse. And oh yes, I managed to make it across that ledge. So this ledge helps me skip the majority of this level, which is fantastic, because this level has this, you know, this sort of maze-like area, which isn't all that fun. But anyways, but the biggest problem with the mouse is that if you push the mouse forward and backwards, you're gonna move your character forward and backwards. So sometimes I'll be sliding forward and backwards a little bit whenever I turn the mouse left and right just to rotate the camera, but it's still better than playing this game as if you're driving the car, you know, like pressing left and right to rotate your character. Also, you can rotate a lot quicker with the mouse, so you'll be more effective at navigating and dodging bullets and stuff like that. But unlike Wolfenstein, where you could not strafe left and right with a single button, like the A or D button on the keyboard, in Doom you can map the strafe left and strafe right to those buttons, so that's pretty cool. And as a result, for the most part, you can play this game like a modern first-person shooter. But like I said in the previous video in Wolfenstein 3D, it was only until the Quake community made that a standard. With Doom, everyone was still using the arrow keys to move the character. the thing I really liked about Doom is the variety of weapons. In Wolfenstein 3D, you only had bullet-based weapons, and that's it. Yes, sure. So far, we've only had bullet-based weapons, but here's a rocket launcher, and it's a nice addition to your arsenal of weapons. And that was an invisible demon. Those pink, you know, line-like demons. They're kind of nerve-wracking, especially when they are invisible and you can't really see them. Funny thing is that the reason why they're so difficult to see is because of the game's low resolution of 320 by 240 pixels. Because when you play this game at a higher resolution, it actually becomes very easy to spot a lot of these creatures. But only a high-res version of this game would be available in the form of Doom 95, which would sort of be a source port of Doom for Windows 95. Speaking of Windows 95, Bill Gates, to promote Windows 95 for being a ideal gaming platform, used Doom as an example to demonstrate to people that you can play this game or games like it in Windows 95, which is much better than, you know, Windows 3.1, which you really were very limited to what games you could play. I actually remember playing Doom on a Windows 95 machine with a 486 processor. It was connected to my Pentium computer. My friend and I, we would play multiplayer Doom. So that was actually pretty cool. And it's quite amazing considering that a Pentium 3 486 can actually communicate with each other playing Doom, whilst one uses Windows 95 and the Pentium 3 uses Windows 98. Now, as you progress through the game, these levels actually become pretty massive. And in fact, thank goodness for the brilliant level design offering the opportunity to skip some of these more annoying sections. Ironically, or not ironically, coincidentally, the sections that you can skip are usually the maze-like sections. And I think that even the guys at id Software knew that it might be annoying to force the player to have to go through the mazes. So they probably included those shortcuts on purpose. I'm not leaving this place just yet because that door is actually timed. It's kind of annoying for speedrunners, but you know, some speedrunners have been able to get a monster to stand right at where the door is when the door closes, so that the door doesn't close because there's a monster in the way. Now, yeah, these monsters, they love just jumping out of nowhere. Fortunately, I know this game quite well, so I know where they come from. I would like to talk about a weapon that you'll get later in the game, and it's called the BFG. It's not the weapon you'll get after the rocket launcher. You'll first get the plasma rifle, but the BFG was a very iconic weapon. It was extremely powerful. It also used a lot of ammo, like 40 plasma rifle ammo, whatever you call it, ammo, energy ball things, whatever you call it. But the BFG was very iconic, and it was so iconic that a lot of games would try to create their own BFG equivalent. Like Unreal Tournament would have things like the, I think it's called the Redeemer, which is like this big massive gun that creates a huge explosion. But also id Software would release different BFG models through with every installment of Doom and Quake. But the problem with the BFG is in its name. Apparently everyone thinks that the BFG is called the Big Effin' Gun or Big Flippin' Gun or whatever you want to call it. But the real name of the BFG is actually the Big Fragging Gun. And that makes perfect sense because the BFG, you know, in its name, used the word frag, which is a word that would be used a lot in id Software shooters. Instead of referring to, you know, kills or deaths and stuff like that. Instead, they'd use the word frag instead. Probably the reason why they use the word frag is because, you know, in a lot of these games, when you play multiplayer, you respawn, so it's technically not a death, I guess. But anyways, I also haven't talked about the multiplayer aspect. Yeah, so Doom was the first game to have like LAN multiplayer, and in later versions of Doom there would be internet multiplayer. So that's pretty cool, I must admit. Back in 1993, the internet wasn't extremely widespread, so they could have easily have not included a feature, but see, id Software, they tend to be very forward thinking like that, you know. They always try to include awesome new technology. In fact, they're the ones that, you know, created the standard when it comes to first-person shooters. But anyways, another thing I want to talk about is basically the modding community. That's also another aspect that is so forward thinking. So the modding community sort of has this reputation of, you know, ruining games and stuff like that, but id Software, on the other hand, embraced the modding community, and that's actually pretty cool because as a result, it actually made the game even more popular as a result. And I wish that a lot of game studios would just realize this, that all it does is it makes a game more popular and makes people want to play games more, which, you know, should increase sales and stuff like that. So but the problem with Doom is that because there are some pretty good tools released for creating mods for Doom, that it's really easy to make mods for Doom, which means the amount of mods available for this game is ridiculous. Like, there's just so many mods out there, to the point where the sort of the, I guess you could say, the modding community, or the, you know, mods for Doom is sort of oversaturated. Like, trying to find a really good outstanding mod for Doom can be a bit tedious. And trust me, this is coming from a guy that has experience in this. But anyways, I actually made my own mod for Doom 2, and I'm not sure if I'm gonna release it or what, because it's, I don't know if it's gonna just basically blend into, you know, another generic, you know, I don't know if it's gonna be considered another generic mod. Okay, you see that I fell off that platform because of the mouse. Like, I keep forgetting that if I pull back on the mouse, I'm gonna, you know, step backwards in the game. But anyways, I'm trying to get to a secret here. This is one thing I really love about the level design in this game. That's a map, by the way, that I just picked up, and of course environmental suit to help me survive the acid. Anyways, and of course, or I don't know if it's acid, it's probably toxins instead. And just so many neat items and stuff to pick up. And of course, that blue orb I picked up was, you know, based on the Wolfenstein blue orb that adds another 100% to your health. Except in this game, you can have a max of 199% of health. Actually, in the final version of Doom, in the what do you call it, the full version of Doom, this is just the shareware version, by the way. In the full version of Doom, they actually increased that to 200%. Not exactly sure why they felt that had to happen, but whatever. Anyways, but yeah, the blue orb adds an additional 100%. So if you have 100% health, it will increase it another 100% until you reach your health limit. Unlike Wolfenstein 3D, which you only had 100%. So yeah, that is Doom. There's so many other things that I want to talk about, but I think we might do another part for Doom, for the original Doom, and show you guys the source ports that were available for Doom, that are still available for Doom, which would allow you to play this game on the modern PC with enhanced graphics. So in fact, I'm gonna try and upload that video as quickly as I can.